Hello, everyone. This is our development talks, and we rather call it development talks. And we are very fortunate to have Mr. Sohail Hasnie, who worked as principal energy specialist in the Asian Development Bank for 22 years. So I would request him to introduce himself first. I also have Mr. Said Ahmed with me here.
Thank you, Johir and Said. Nice to meet you in a very different platform. Long time back, we used to be in the same class back in Bangladesh. So it's amazing we have grown ourselves into different part of the different world in different industries. My name is Sohail Hasnie. I spent about 22 years, as you mentioned, at the Asian Development Bank, working different part of the energy sector. Geographically, I worked across all of Asia, except some of the Pacific countries. And although I haven't had any direct opportunity to work in Bangladesh, I worked in the regulatory framework of Bangladesh as a World Bank consultant many years back, late 90s. As a background, I have a couple of engineering degrees, and then I have a MBA in finance. Most of my work had been in the power sector. I used to work for a power company in Australia in system planning for more than a decade, and then including 5 years with an independent regulator, and was involved in the privatization of most of Victoria's power sector. And from that financing background, I came to the Asian Development Bank. Ultimately, as the world was changing, I ended up becoming very focused into energy efficiency, renewable energy, and I ended up doing the largest electric vehicle for ADB, about $500 million investment in the Philippines in 2012. And I took an early retirement a couple of years back. And since then, I've been very focused on electric vehicles, batteries, and solar power. I have a podcast myself, which had more than about 200 plus episodes. And I'm very excited to be here with you guys and be able to add some value in any way I can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sohail. Same with us. We are also very excited, and we are, although we know to some extent your background, but it's an excellent background. So my first question to you, it's a bit broad-based in a way. From your background, energy, clean energy, green energy, from the global perspective and from Bangladeshi perspective, what do you see the prospects?
That's $1 million question, because energy industry is fundamentally has changed in the last decade, especially in the last 3 years, because one, solar panels have become cheap as chips. 100-watt solar panel used to be a few $1,000s. Right now, the wholesale price is about 9 cents a watt. So technically, a 100-watt panel is $10. And that was unthinkable even 10 years ago. Similarly, battery change everything. One of the fundamental things we learned about electrical engineering or physics, that energy cannot be stored. Supply and demand has to be matched instantly. And that has changed dramatically. If we look at in Australia, last 7 years, when we started, right now we have 33,000 megawatt installed on rooftop solar. That's equivalent of Australia's total installed capacity. So the grid now, the fundamental assumption was power gets generated in one place, transmission distribution brings to your door, and you consume. And now the whole fundamental things have changed. Now during daytime, distribution and transmission have to get electricity from those individual households, bring it to central, and dispatch. And if you look at South Australia, and that's what is happening few days in a row, that's what is happening in California. And then the electric cars are coming, which has large batteries. They can not only supply the house, they can even supply the grid. So I think the fundamentally electricity industry, as we know, has changed. So the prospects are huge. It just depends who you ask. If you ask a fossil fuel industry, they want to lobby, They want to stop us from doing these things. But if you ask the people who want to change the world, the potentials, the sky's the limit. It's a very exciting time to be in the electricity industry.
Absolutely. So, one intervening question before Said may ask you. Uh, so, what I get from you, there is a lot of prospect for public-private partnership in this arena. So, would you touch upon that public-private partnership aspects of this green and clean energy?
Yeah, it's actually, you asked, it's very interesting because private public partnership before it was that the public sector do not have enough financing, so we need to bring in private sector because they have the money. But now the things have changed even more. Public sector have no clue what's happening. And the knowledge is also in the private sector, in a very limited private sector. So unless the partnership gets established, unless the public sector start thinking the regulatory framework in a very different way, even by way of regulation by contract, you have to let things grow before you have sorted out what is the best way to do regulation. Just give an example. I was presenting with a regulator's office in the Philippines, and I was telling them, do not charge or make the electric vehicle charging a monopoly service because you are going to kill the industry. Let the industry sort it out because it's such a no barriers to entry industry. Anybody can set up a charging. So intuitively, you might want to regulate. But if you let it go, the market will drop 10 times faster because as soon as you decide to regulate, you have to decide what's the standard. You have to decide what's the pricing, what's the cost of capital, how many years to recovery, how do we make sure who has what geographical franchise. Just don't get there. It's better you, as a public sector, bring the private sector in, talk about them, saying, how can we work together? What you need us to do as the government so that you can move faster. And that's what I think private-public partnership is very important, but for a different reason, though. Before it was just for the money, but I think also for the knowledge and also defining how the future energy industry should look like, because no one knows. It's a completely different world we are ahead.
Basically, what you were saying is that, which we also agree with, is not just about money, also innovation, because innovation is the key to future industry in any, for example, for that matter, not only energy or clean. Now, I'll draw your attention to another development. Recently, the government of Bangladesh is in discussion with a few Chinese solar plant manufacturers. There is a potential that those companies might set up plants, manufacturing plants in Bangladesh, especially in view of the recent change in the American administration. The new administration is coming up. There are a lot of speculations about the new restrictions on Chinese imports. So, what do you think it might? How do you think it might impact the clean energy industry, not only in Bangladesh but also in the other countries surrounding this area?
It's hard to say how it might impact because globally people are looking for cheaper and the panels are getting cheaper. And obviously, Bangladesh will have a much cheaper cost base than China, I would assume, because that's why all the garments industries, some of the garments industries moved away from China and Hong Kong. So I think this is a fantastic opportunity, but also at the political level, we have come to a point, if all our solar are sourced from a single country, that somehow enters into the discussion of energy security as well. So I think from that viewpoint, this would be a tremendous potential for Bangladesh and also for the Chinese companies who want to diversify. God forbid, if we have another COVID, for example, you don't want to have all of global solar into one particular country and the logistical I mean, we have seen what happens if it's one place. So I think that diversification makes amazing sense. And Bangladesh, with 170 million people in there and cheap labor, I think, yeah, the average age in Bangladesh is still 35. Like China has the issue of growing, aging population as well, like Europe, right? So this makes sense. Absolutely.
It is in a way mutually beneficial, as you mentioned, like it will create huge employment generation. At the same time, foreign currency earning for Bangladesh, I think, if such investments are made. Yeah,
Exactly.
It's also
so
energy security issue from the buyer's perspective. If
Yes.
I am a buyer of country X and I'm buying 10,000 megawatt equivalent for the next 3 years, even if costs more, I will be interested to buy 4,000 somewhere and 6,000 somewhere else. Just a diversification of logistics and everything else, right? Forgetting the tariff issues.
Coupled with the development of battery technology, there
Mhm.
is solar or whatever, clean energy source plus storage capacity with this new
Mhm.
technology in batteries that creates a new dimension.
Mhm.
So energy security wise, the consumers will be in a much better position, I would say. They wouldn't have to depend on utility companies or the extensive transmission lines. Or sometimes if there is a power shortage from the traditional suppliers, they can run on their own for a while. What do you think? That might.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a home battery. I have a 11 kilowatt on rooftop, and I have over 13.5 kilowatt hour on a Tesla home battery. And my electricity bill has been negative this month. I mean, because I sold more to the market than what I have used in the house. So uh, the battery prices are coming down. Last year, end of last year, it was 117 or something like that dollars a kilowatt hour. This year, I checked. Even some people argued. One of the guests in my podcast, he said it's at $50. If battery become like that, we live in a very different world. And countries like Bangladesh should just completely go off grid with such a uh, huge residential population and very little daily consumption, right?
Yeah. So very glad to hear that. So finally, we are heading towards a kind of conclusion. So in view of the development, what we heard from Saeed and you reflected on it, like there might be a big market on of investment in Bangladesh, and prospects are huge, employment generation plus foreign currency earning. But do you have, from your experience, any words of caution in this respect for the policymakers?
I think the policymakers just have to stay away from the development so that, because as I said in the beginning, it is such a fluid environment. It's such a nascent environment. You just have to make sure that uh, the technology coming into the country of a certain quality, because we cannot carry lithium battery on the plane. But I brought all my lithium battery for a project on a plane many years ago. Then people started making very cheap lithium batteries, especially those Segway type little transport vehicle, and they started catching fire. And then, of course, now everything is banned on the carrying the planes. And plus, of course, lead acid battery and whole fossil fuel industry lobbied against it. So that slowed down things quite a bit. So I think the government has to be careful in terms of looking at the technology side of it, teaching consumer to be aware of the technology so that few fire here and there do not uh, cast a dark shadow on the technology spec overall. Like every time there is a fire on a Tesla a battery, you hear everybody saying that. Then I said, hey, when did you last time see a blow up a car in your neighborhood? And you sort of wrote about it. You said, oh yeah, if there is an accident, car do catch fire. So I think we have to, the government can play into the role of educating people about quality without trying to develop a standard that will take 5-6 years. They should enable, in my view, that's government, not in Bangladesh, anywhere right now, just to let private sector move faster. And government can also be sort of a not quite a supervisory role, more of an observatory role that
Can we
makes
say
sure things
facilitator?
happen.
Can we say facilitator instead?
Of course, facilitation there, but in terms of also gathering knowledge and sort of distributive, because the competition is the ultimate regulation. If your competition happens free and fair, you don't need a regulator, right?
Yeah, so I think there are two key things. One is competition, free and fair competition in the market, transparency, and maintaining an environment where innovation can continue unhindered.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if the big players don't come in and interfere the market, there too much energy going out there. I talk to a lot of CEOs through my podcast and my private life. There's an immense amount of energy to make things happen. So we just have to make sure we don't come in a way.
Yes.
Yeah. So the key word, the takeaway, the competition is the key to regulation. I think that's what you uttered. That's very important. And Mr. Sohail Hasnie, we are very glad again to have you in our Development Talks platform. I believe our audience, national and international audience, would be benefited by your views. And maybe we may continue this discussion if we see a lot of interest and specific questions based on this discussion. We may again contact you to have a further discussion. So thank you so much.
No. Before you finish, I want to say something as well.
Sure.
No, I
Please.
think competition is a best regulator always. So industries where you cannot introduce competition, like a natural monopoly, transmission, distribution, you put a regulator in. That's a principle in general, right? Competition is the best regulator. But what I want to say for Bangladesh, I see personally, Bangladesh should use the benefit of cheap battery and solar prices. It's a predominantly residential customers across the country, residential and commercial. Per capita consumption in Australia is about, say, 15 kilowatt hour. I think you and I, maybe depending on how big the house we are in, we maybe also do 10 kilowatt hour a day. But average Bangladeshi consumption average is less than a kilowatt hour, right? People do not run air condition, people do not run heater, right? So I think the project that ITCOL did many years ago across the Bangladesh, that was only for 30 watt of solar, which is, sounds a bit rude, but the way look at it is a 1/3 of a 100-watt light bulb, right? So it was not much. Now with that 30 watt, of course, you can run 10 good LEDs, but those days not. So if we increase that size to the size of a 40-inch television, that is 150 watt, and a 1 kilowatt hour battery wholesale maybe about $70. So I believe within less than $300 to $400, you can provide a house a capacity to generate electricity and keep it in the house, maybe even 3-4 days backup. I think that may be the way to go for future, because Bangladesh is a country that has one of the highest energy intensity country that I have worked in, and I have worked across Asia, even some cases more than Kazakhstan, Bangladesh energy industry, because Kazakhstan now has solar, because Bangladesh may be only few countries in the world where oil gets burned to generate electricity. We only see that in Pacific. It was, coal is still common for baseload, but burning oil is quite unusual. Indonesia, few cases was there, but not anymore. I personally did a project. We eliminated those. So I think Bangladesh is in a perfect place to attract tons and tons of solar everywhere. Now solar can be printed. I know the previously one of the very senior government official, I don't want to put a name, he had a very strong view against solar in Bangladesh because everyone has a stake in the process. Now solar is so cheap. I think people can have solar panel as a fence, house fence, because
Yeah.
you can Google in Europe, some of the countries are doing it. National highway on the side of the rivers, floating or otherwise. I mean, solar can be everywhere. And that's how Bangladesh can be energy self-sufficient in a way, because the consumption is very little, very little. And the electric boat, electric bicycle, electric tricycle, drones, you name it. Because if you centralize even from Dhaka, the remotest part of Bangladesh is within 150 or 200-kilometer radius. A single drone can fly, right? You can do an emergency medical supply across Bangladesh with 1 or 2 satellites. So I think people have to rethink very differently. And all these things will be enabled by new generation if just government doesn't come in the way. And as you mentioned before, if the Bangladesh is able to mobilize sort of indigenous solar industry, battery assembly industry, rest will happen automatically. Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to say that.
It's okay. It's very illuminating discussion and very enlightening
Yes.
for, again, I would say for international and national audience, Sohail. So with that, if we allow, we may conclude today's edition. And
Absolutely.
our heartiest thanks and gratitude to you
Yes.
for making time for us from your precious and busy schedule. We may touch base again.
Yes.
Okay?
We'll certainly have him.
Yeah. So bye for today, Sohail.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.